In a climate-controlled storage room in the basement of the Reston County Sheriff's evidence facility, on a shelf marked Row 14, Bay 3, there is a sealed brown paper bag. The bag is labeled with a case number, an evidence tag, and the date October 19, 2011. Inside the bag is a single button. It is olive green, made of pressed plastic, approximately 2 centimeters in diameter, and it has a small chip out of its top edge. For 12 years, that button sat in that bag in that room, and nobody picked it up except for the annual inventory audit, during which a clerk would scan its barcode and put it back. The button was logged as evidence in the murder of a 36-year-old veterinarian named Diane Voss. The button did not match Diane Voss's clothing. The button did not match the clothing of any of the 17 suspects interviewed in the original investigation. The button did not match anything the detectives could identify, so the detectives moved past it. In December 2023, a forensic intern named Sangeeta Rao opened that bag for an unrelated training exercise. She held the button up to the light, turned it twice, and said to no one in particular, "This is from a hunting jacket, a specific brand. I sold these in college." This is the story of what happened next, and what should have happened 12 years earlier, and why a button that anyone in the right industry could have identified within 3 seconds spent 12 years inside a brown paper bag in a basement. The button was found on the gravel driveway of Diane Voss's home in the rural community of Hayford Bend, approximately 14 feet from the side door of the garage, where her body was discovered on the morning of October 18, 2011. The medical examiner determined that Diane had been struck twice with a blunt object, likely a length of pipe or a tire iron, and that the time of death fell between 9 and 11 o'clock the previous evening. The button was photographed in place by a crime scene technician named Robert Hollis, then bagged, tagged, and entered into the evidence log at 11:47 a.m. The bag was a standard paper evidence bag, 8 inches by 6 inches, sealed with red tamper-evident tape. The tag listed the item as button, green plastic, 1 each. Hollis's collection notes added one additional sentence: recovered approximately 14 feet northwest of decedent's position. No matching button observed on decedent or premises. That sentence is the entire record of investigative thinking applied to the button for the next 12 years. The button was not made of an unusual material. It was not stamped with a brand identifier. It was not custom tooled or unique in any way that would have made it stand out to a generalist investigator. It looked like the kind of button that comes on a jacket, a vest, a shirt, or a coat. It looked, in other words, like a button. And in a case where the obvious suspect was Diane's estranged husband, and a secondary suspect was a former boyfriend, and a tertiary suspect was a contractor with whom Diane had been in a property line dispute, nobody had an obvious place to put a button that did not match any of their clothing. It went into the bag went into the box went onto the shelf, and the case, despite an investigation that lasted 9 months and consumed approximately 1,700 hours of investigative time, went cold in the summer of 2012. Diane Voss was 36 years old. She was the only veterinarian in Hayford Bend and the surrounding county, which meant her practice served not only the household pets of a rural population, but also the working livestock of the cattle operations and small horse properties that dominated the local economy. She had moved to the area 8 years before her death, after finishing veterinary school in Iowa, and she had built a practice from a converted barn on a 5-acre property she had bought with a small inheritance from her grandmother. She lived alone. She had been married briefly from 2007 to 2009 to a man named Trevor Voss, an electrician from a neighboring county. The marriage had ended badly. Trevor had filed for divorce, alleging emotional abandonment. Diane had not contested it. They had no children. They had no joint property. They had not seen each other, by mutual accounts from people who knew both, for approximately 14 months at the time of Diane's death. The investigation focused on Trevor for the first 6 weeks. He had no alibi for the evening in question. He said he had been home alone, watching a college football game, and could not produce a witness. His vehicle had been seen by a clerk at a gas station 11 miles from Diane's house at approximately 8:30 p.m. on the night of the murder. He had a history of 1 prior arrest dismissed for a verbal altercation with a coworker in 2005. He had, in the assessment of the lead detective, the right profile for the kind of crime that had occurred. A male in his late 30s with a personal history with the victim and no alibi. But there was nothing else. No physical evidence linking Trevor to the scene. No witnesses placing him at the house. No forensic match between Trevor's clothing, his vehicle, his tools, or his person and anything recovered from the crime scene. The lead detective, a woman named Ellen Mariska, kept Trevor under active investigation for 93 days and could not bring charges. The case file by November 2012 was reclassified as active cold and moved to the cold case division. The button stayed in the bag. The bag stayed in the box. The box stayed on the shelf. Between October 2011 and December 2023, 6 people handled that brown paper bag. Robert Hollis, the crime scene technician who bagged it, looked at the button for approximately 90 seconds at the scene and approximately 3 additional minutes back at the lab. He photographed both sides, measured the diameter, noted the chip on the upper edge, and logged it. He had collected, by his own estimate, in a deposition given years later, more than 4,000 pieces of evidence in his career. He told the deposing attorney that the button looked like an everyday button. When asked if he had any specific thoughts about what kind of garment it might have come, he said, "Not really. Could have been anything." Ellen Mariska, the lead detective, examined the button twice. The first time was during her initial walkthrough of the evidence at the lab on October 19, 2011. The second was during a case review meeting in March 2012, when she pulled the bag from inventory and laid out the physical evidence on a table to discuss with 2 supervising officers. The button was discussed for approximately 2 minutes. The consensus was that it was an unidentified object that could not be tied to any suspect or to the victim. It was not pursued further. In 2014, an outside consultant, a retired homicide detective named Walter Pruitt, hired by Diane's family to review the cold case at their expense, examined the evidence box. He spent 4 hours with the file and 1 hour with the physical evidence. He noted the button in his report. He wrote, "The unidentified button is the most interesting unaddressed item in the file. Recommend retail sourcing through fashion industry consultant." His report was submitted to the family. The family forwarded a copy to the sheriff's department. The department logged the report and took no follow-up action. There was no budget line for a fashion industry consultant. In 2017, the evidence box was moved during a basement renovation. The clerk who moved it checked the inventory list against the contents, confirmed the button was present, and reshelved it. In 2020, during a department-wide audit of cold case evidence prompted by a state initiative on DNA retesting, a junior officer named Damon Wells pulled the box and reviewed the evidence list against the contents. He spent 11 minutes with the file. He did not handle the button itself. He confirmed the inventory and reshelved the box. In December 2023, Sangeeta Rao opened the bag. For 12 years, while that bag sat on row 14, bay 3, the official investigation into the murder of Diane Voss consisted of approximately the following activity. In 2013, one phone call to Trevor Voss to confirm he was still living at his last known address. In 2015, a routine database check on the original suspect list. In 2018, a tip-line call from an anonymous source claiming to know who really did it. The call was traced to a former coworker of Diane's with a long history of unsubstantiated tips and was dismissed within 48 hours. In 2021, a single conversation between the cold case division and Diane's sister, Patricia, who was inquiring about whether DNA testing had advanced in any way that might benefit her sister's case. That is the entire investigative record for 12 years. I want to be careful here about how I characterize this. Cold case divisions in small county sheriff's departments are not staffed and funded the way television depicts them. The Reston County Sheriff's Department had, in this period, 2 assigned cold case investigators handling, between them, approximately 73 active cold files. Diane Voss's case was one of them. There was no mechanism by which any single case received concentrated attention without a triggering event, a new piece of evidence, a witness coming forward, a related crime that suggested a link. The button on its own was not, in the framework the department operated in, a triggering event. It was an unidentified piece of evidence. The department had hundreds of unidentified pieces of evidence sitting in boxes across dozens of cases. Nobody was going to pull the Voss file and start over because of a button. What would have triggered new investigation and did not happen for 12 years was someone with specific industry knowledge picking up the button and recognizing what it was from. That person did not exist on the department's staff. They did not exist among the consultants the department could afford. They did not exist among the cold case volunteer reviewers the department occasionally used. They existed, but not in any room where the button was likely to be placed in front of them, until the day Sangeeta Rao opened the bag. Sangeeta Rao was 23 years old in December 2023. She was a forensic science graduate student at the State University, completing a semester-long internship with the Reston County Crime Lab as part of her degree program. The internship was unpaid. She had moved into a one-bedroom rental in Reston for the duration and was, by her own account in a later interview, mostly bored. The lab work she had been assigned was largely entry-level evidence cataloging, and she had hoped for something more substantive. On the morning of December 7, 2023, the senior forensic technician supervising her, a woman named Tara Whitfield, gave her a training exercise. Tara had selected, from the cold case evidence inventory, 10 bags from 10 different cases. The exercise was for Sangeeta to open each bag, identify the contents, log her observations, and propose an analytical approach. It was, Tara would later say, exactly the kind of routine exercise she had given to a dozen interns over the years. There had been nothing special about which 10 bags she had selected. She had pulled them more or less at random from the cold case shelves. Bag number 7 was the Voss button. Sangeeta opened the bag, removed the button, set it on a clean tray, and looked at it under the workstation's lighted magnifier. She turned it twice. She picked it up between gloved fingers and examined the back. She set it down again. Then she said the sentence that, in retrospect, restarted the entire investigation. "This is from a hunting jacket, a specific brand. I sold these in college." Tara, who was working at the next station, looked up. Sangeeta explained. The button was a particular kind of pressed olive green plastic that had been used between approximately 2005 and 2012 on the chest pocket and cuff closures of a discontinued hunting jacket line made by an outdoor outfitter called Ridgeback Mountain Outfitters. The brand was regional, sold primarily in the upper Midwest and through a small chain of sporting goods stores. Sangeeta had worked at one of those stores during her undergraduate years in Wisconsin, selling exactly this line of jacket. She knew the buttons because she had reattached them with a sewing kit on at least a dozen occasions when customers returned to the store with damaged jackets in warranty claims. The buttons had been a known weak point in the design. They chipped exactly the way the button on the tray had chipped when struck against hard surfaces. Tara picked up the button. She turned it. She said, "You can tell us the brand from this." Sangeeta said, "I can tell you the brand, the style, the years it was produced, and the color line." Tara Whitfield walked the button to her supervisor's office within 30 minutes. The supervisor, a man named Carl Bremer, called the cold case investigator currently assigned to the Voss file. A sergeant named Maria Quintana, who had inherited the file in 2019 when her predecessor retired. Sergeant Quintana was at her desk. She came down to the lab within the hour. By the end of the day, the button had been rephotographed, remeasured, and provisionally identified to a specific product line. Ridgeback Mountain Outfitters, model RM440 hunting jacket, olive green color line, production years 2007-2012. Sangeeta had pulled up an archived product catalog from a brand history website and matched the button to a photograph of the jacket's cuff detail. The chip pattern on the recovered button was consistent with the known failure patterns Sangeeta described from her retail experience. By the end of the week, Sergeant Quintana had a list of every Ridgeback retailer that had sold the RM440 jacket in the region between 2007 and 2011. There were 11 such retailers. 6 had closed by 2023. 5 were still operating, but only 2 had retained sales records from that period. From those 2, Quintana obtained customer lists for the model in question, cross-referenced against the original suspect list from the Voss investigation. One name matched. It was not Trevor Voss. It was not the former boyfriend. It was not the contractor. It was a man named Ronald Cleary, who had been interviewed exactly once during the original investigation, on October 24, 2011, 6 days after the murder, as part of a routine canvass of Diane's professional contacts. Ronald Cleary was a livestock farmer who had used Diane's veterinary practice for approximately 3 years. He had been interviewed because his name appeared in her client records, and because he had picked up a sick calf from her clinic 2 days before her death. The original detective had spent 22 minutes with him. He had been cooperative. He had said he had nothing to do with Diane personally. He had been removed from the active list. Ronald Cleary had also, according to the retailer records, purchased a Ridgeback RM440 hunting jacket in olive green from a Reston area sporting goods store on November 14, 2009. What happened over the next 9 months is, in cold case investigative terms, fast. Sergeant Quintana obtained a warrant to search the property of Ronald Cleary in February 2024. The warrant was specific. The search was for a Ridgeback RM40 hunting jacket, olive green, with a missing button on the chest pocket or cuff closure. The jacket was not found. Cleary, when questioned, said he had given it away years ago and could not remember to whom. He was cooperative, calm, and notably unsurprised that investigators were asking him about a jacket from 12 years earlier. Quintana, who had spent 2 months building a file before the search, was not deterred by the absent jacket. She had by this point also obtained cell tower records placing Ronald Cleary's phone within 2 miles of Diane Voss's property at approximately 10:15 p.m. on the night of the murder. This had not been pursued in 2011 because cell tower analysis had not been considered necessary. Cleary was not a suspect at the time. Veterinary records showing that Cleary had brought a calf to Diane's clinic on October 16, 2011, 2 days before her death. The calf had been put down on Diane's recommendation after she diagnosed it with an untreatable wasting illness. Cleary had paid the bill, but according to a vet tech who remembered the visit, had been visibly distressed and had argued with Diane about whether the calf could have been saved with more aggressive treatment. Bank records showing that Cleary had been in financial difficulty in 2011. The calf had been one of his most valuable animals. Its loss had pushed him below an operational margin that, by his own accountant's records, had nearly forced him to sell his property within months. A witness statement taken in March 2024 from a former neighbor of Cleary's that placed Ronald Cleary in a state I'd describe as enraged at the diner the morning of October 17, 2011, 24 hours before Diane Voss's death. The neighbor had not been interviewed in the original investigation because Cleary had not been a suspect. In June 2024, after additional forensic work reestablishing the connection between the recovered button and a hunting jacket of the specific model Cleary was on record as having purchased, Ronald Cleary was arrested and charged with the murder of Diane Voss. He pleaded not guilty. Ronald Cleary's trial began in February 2025. He was 61 years old. He had no criminal history apart from one citation for a livestock fencing dispute in 1998. He had been, in the assessment of every neighbor who testified, a quiet, hard-working man. The prosecution's case rested on the button, the cell tower records, the financial motive, the witness testimony from the diner, and a forensic analysis of soil samples taken from a pair of work boots seized from Cleary's property. Boots that the prosecution argued contained mineral content consistent with the specific gravel driveway at Diane Voss's home. The defense, ably represented, argued that none of these elements individually constitute proof of guilt. The button could have come from any jacket of that model. The cell tower records placed Cleary within a 2-mile radius, but not at the scene. The diner witness was relying on 12-year-old memory, and the soil and analysis was suggestive rather than conclusive. The defense was not wrong about any of these points. Individually, none of the evidence was conclusive. The prosecution's case was a case built entirely on aggregation. The jury deliberated for 6 days. They returned a guilty verdict on the lesser-included charge of voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. The distinction mattered. It suggested that the jurors believed Cleary had killed Diane Voss, but had done so in a state of rage rather than premeditation, consistent with the diner witness testimony and the financial and emotional motive narrative the prosecution had constructed. Cleary was sentenced to 18 years. He was eligible for parole in 12. He was 61. The math of his life and the math of his sentence meant, statistically, that he would die in prison. Diane Voss's sister, Patricia, was in the courtroom for the verdict. She had been in the courtroom every day of the trial. She had been in correspondence with Sergeant Quintane for 14 months and with the original investigation for 12 years before that. When the verdict was read, she did not cry. She told a reporter in an interview given on the courthouse steps that afternoon, "I have waited 12 years to know who. I have not yet started to feel anything else. I think that will take longer than I have." Sangeeta Rao finished her internship in May 2024. She was offered a permanent position with the Reston County Crime Lab and declined. She returned to her graduate program. She has spoken once publicly about the case in a brief panel discussion at a forensic science conference in October 2024. And she said something there that has stayed with me as I have worked through the documents of this investigation. She said, "The button was not hidden. It was sitting in plain sight in a labeled bag, in a labeled box, in a labeled room. What was missing was the eye that knew what it was." Forensic science has spent a long time getting better at analyzing the evidence we know how to analyze. It has spent less time thinking about what to do when the evidence sits there, and nobody on the team knows what it is. That is a different problem. It is a problem of access to specific industry knowledge. The Reston County Sheriff's Department, in the wake of the Cleary conviction, made one specific reform. They established a quarterly meeting in which cold case evidence items that had not been definitively identified were photographed, cataloged in a shared database, and circulated to a network of regional industry consultants, a network they had not previously had. The network now includes a fashion industry consultant, a firearms collector, a horticulturist, a metallurgist, and 3 other specialists whose expertise has, in the 18 months since the database went live, helped identify objects from 4 additional cold cases. 2 of those cases have been reopened. None have yet produced charges. The button itself remains in the evidence bag. The bag is now stored in a more accessible location, but the physical object has not been moved out of police custody, since it is now a piece of evidence in a closed homicide conviction. It is the same button it was when Robert Hollis bagged it on October 19, 2011. The chip on the upper edge has not changed. The olive green plastic has not faded. It is objectively the same object it was the day it was taken from a gravel driveway near a body. What changed between October 19, 2011 and December 7, 2023 is that the right person finally looked at it. The system did not catch up to the truth on its own. It took an intern in a training exercise to do what 12 years of institutional process could not. And the institutional reform that followed, the consultant network, the database, the cross-discipline review, is, in a strict sense, the system trying to make sure that next time, the eye that knows what the object is will be in the room before 12 years have passed. Patricia Voss drove home from the courthouse on the day of the verdict. She has said, in the interviews she has given since, that she stopped at the gas station 11 miles from her sister's old property, the same gas station where, on the night of the murder, a clerk had seen Trevor Voss's vehicle and had given a statement that had focused the investigation in the wrong direction for 93 days. The gas station was still there, the same overhead lighting, the same row of pumps. Patricia bought a coffee. She drank it in her car. She thought about a button she had never seen, in a bag she had never opened, in a room she had never entered, that had spent 12 years 3 counties away holding the answers she had wanted to know for almost the same span of time. Then she put the cup in the holder. She started the engine. She drove the rest of the way home. The lights at the gas station stayed on behind her.